Today's episode is sponsored by Rev, the productivity powerhouse for content creators, journalists, market researchers, and more. Capture audio from anywhere, get AI-powered summaries and quotes, and leave security worries behind with Rev. Whether you're on the go or in the office, Rev's got you covered. Discover more at rev.com. I'm Kendall Kelton, and I'm your host today on The Rough Draft. Featuring honest conversations with folks from across the creative industry, The Rough Draft explores the creative process, tools, and resources used by some of the best in the business. From journalists to content creators and business leaders, we shed light on what it looks like to break into the industry, make mistakes, collaborate with others, and also the essential tools that help us along the way. This week, I'm excited to welcome Peter Balonon-Rosen, a producer for Vox's daily news podcast, Today Explained. With a rich background in audio journalism, Peter has worked across several acclaimed podcasts, including Throughline at NPR and shows at Marketplace like The Uncertain Hour and This Is Uncomfortable. A veteran in the field, his passion is for storytelling about inequality, culture, and policy, and his work has been recognized with numerous awards. On today's episode, Peter discusses the creative and collaborative process behind bringing his audio stories to life. All right, so now I want to talk about your creative process, Peter, and how you make an audio story. When you're putting together a podcast episode, how do you approach the story, or what is your process for approaching a story as a producer, like getting started?
Well, I think first of all, I want to make sure it's something that I'm interested in, right? I think that is very much one of the main lenses that I'm looking for stories through is just like my own personal curiosity and something that feels either relevant to my life or like sticky or something that like feels like worth chatting about with a friend. And then it's often just like trying to find the person who can speak to that, right? Because if you're putting together an audio story, you need someone who's going to be on the other side of that microphone. And so when it comes to more newsy things, it's often looking about people who have like written about this stuff or people who have studied something, whatever the phenomena you're looking at. If it's more on the kind of like personal storytelling side of things, you're trying to find people who have shared about their life or who are willing to. And I find that for that part of things, Reddit and Twitter have been like very good resources, places where people are spilling the beans about their own life online. And then you can reach out and say, hey, I thought this was like really interesting. Do you mind if I ask you about that and sharing that?
We talked earlier about, the love you have for the fact that as a producer, you get to wear all these different hats and you get to learn all of these different things and applications from music to sound. So I'd love to hear a bit more about like what are the strategies or tools you consistently rely on to create these stories?
Probably my teammates. I feel like having good people to work with and talk to or like collaborate with are like is really important. People to bounce ideas off of, I feel like helps make any idea much better. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this type of work is kind of the process of watching kind of ideas grow. And so I find the process of just kind of like talking through things, you'll find one kernel that you find really interesting and someone else will have a different kernel that they find interesting, and you can kind of build on it and grow, especially when you're pitching stories. And then I guess like as far as like hard tools go, I mean, I mentioned like Reddit, Twitter, those are good places to like find people. I do a lot of my work in Pro Tools. So I'm working in that every day. And I don't think this work would be possible without that.
Considering when you started your career, how have technological changes impacted your production? Because I mean, even like the rise of AI and like getting summaries or being able to like generate social posts from things. I mean, things have been changing so fast, it feels like, the last few years.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the biggest change that has impacted my work has been like transcription services and just like how much time I need to spend getting transcripts of things and like swimming in tape. There is something that is really special about like swimming in tape and really kind of like understanding it and feeling it wash over you. But it also just takes like a lot of time to like log it all and make it all happen. And so that has been like a very useful thing. I haven't really like played with like AI so much. I don't know. I think as far as like production and like sound design goes, I feel like right now we're kind of in a little bit of an exciting moment where there is a lot more kind of like 360 sound design happening with all of our headphone technologies that are advancing and finding ways to like really make sound and audio storytelling much more cinematic than we did in the past.
I've noticed in a few podcasts that I listened to, and then also listening through some of your own work, use of, kids talking in the background, or like there's a laugh placement here, or like somebody's walking and crunching on leaves, or like that, just like this one spark of music that you need to have to generate like some sort of feeling. Like it is very, I think when you strip that away from it, it does create a different experience for the user.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's really important. I do think like just COVID really also transformed like how people do podcasting. Like here we are, we're not necessarily sitting next to one another, but we are still able to connect to this way. Now we can turn every guest into a junior audio producer and have them kind of record themselves and help us, which has opened up a lot of possibilities. It's also changed just like kind of the sound and feel like of a lot of radio and a lot of podcasting. Like there's a lot of the like being out and hearing that leaf crunch that I do miss, that I don't feel like I'm hearing quite as much as I once did. And so I think that with this kind of more connectivity, it's made things a lot more accessible, but it's also changed the sound. It's changed the feel of what audio stuff sounds like these days.
Well, and I think it's also just changed the amount of content you have available. Like there's so much out there. What are some other like challenges you think are facing the industry, or even opportunities that you're excited about?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge is funding right now. In the past year, we've seen a lot of kind of legacy shows ended. We've seen a lot of colleagues getting laid off. I think there was a real bubble that burst, and like there's been a lot of contraction. I think people kind of had to have a reckoning that these podcast series weren't going to make the huge bucks that a lot of people maybe were betting on. And so finding sustainable business models to continue this work, I think, is kind of probably the biggest challenge facing the industry. There's all sorts of innovative ways people are trying to get money. There's subscription models now to podcasts, different ways of trying to like monetize things. And so I'm interested if someone cracks that code and figures out, with all this content, everyone is on the search for new listeners and everyone's on the search for dollars. And if there's someone who's out there who can put those two together, I think we would all benefit from that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And so then what advice would you give someone trying to break into this field? Like if they're a student, for example, and they're just getting started.
Do stuff that feels like yourself. I feel like if you can point to things that you make and say, hey, this one thing feels like a Peter touch, feels like a whoever touch, I feel like then you're on to something good, right? I think the best artists, no matter what medium they're working in, like you're like, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, that that looks like a Scorsese movie, right? And so finding little things that feel like you, that you're able to bring into your work, I think is really the important thing. Like that's one thing. And then at the same time, rip people off, like literally like find things that you like, that you appreciate, that other people are doing, and say, hey, let me try to do it too. It's all a learning process, right? Like, don't necessarily plagiarize someone, but like if there are certain techniques that you are very into, like I remember listening to certain pieces and being like, wow, I really love the way that they intro this person, or like they give the way they talk about this person's like character traits, or they in an interview like this where you're sitting down with someone, like how they remark about like something in the background that like helps you understand who that person is a little bit more. And then I was like, all right, let me try. And so like finding little ways to kind of rip off techniques that people do, I think will you're never going to do it the exact same, and you can then find your own ways and things that like feel like yourself. But other people are a great learning pad.
Well, so I'd actually, having explored a bit of kind of your craft and your process, I'd like to dive into a deeply personal story that exemplifies how kind of everything comes together. In a podcast episode that you